Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with plastered pork tacos. That's right, I was in the mood for some pork tacos, but I was looking for a little bit of a change of pace to the normal carnita style I would usually make, which led to this wild and crazy experiment. And while I was very happy with the results, and the tacos really were delicious, especially with the apple and jalapeno salsa I'm going to show you how to make, it was also one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen come out of my oven. And actually, believe it or not, looked like a famous historical figure. Or should I say disfigure? But anyway, you'll see what I mean in a few minutes. And to get started, the first thing we're going to do is season up a nice big pork shoulder roast, which as you can see is bone in. And in case you're keeping score at home, that's the shoulder blade. And the first thing I did here was cover this very generously with some freshly and finely minced rosemary, which is not only lovely with pork, but I thought would pair very well with the apples in the salsa later. And then once my pork shoulder was rosemaried, I went ahead and covered that with freshly ground black pepper. And while you can use pretty much any herbs and spices you want here, the only thing I don't want you seasoning this with would be salt, since we're going to put a ton of that in the plaster that's going to cover this, which by the way is the next step. And for that we'll take some all-purpose flour and add to it a tremendous amount of kosher salt. And yes, that is a ridiculous amount, but we're not going to eat the plaster. We are just using it to hopefully trap in that moisture and flavor, and perfectly season the pork as it roasts. And then to that we will add 1 egg white, and then finish up with a splash of cold fresh water, at which point we'll give this a very enthusiastic stirring, until we have something very smooth and lump-free. And since this was an experiment, I wasn't exactly sure how thick I wanted this. Okay, I didn't really want to end up with a dough, but I also didn't want it super runny, otherwise it just might drip off the meat as it cooked. And so what I ended up with after a few minutes of stirring was something that looked like this, which I guess kind of looks like plaster. Although to be honest, I'm not sure I've ever seen wet plaster. But anyway, once that was mixed, I went ahead and plopped my pork in, and then used my spoon to spread that all over. And when I first thought of doing this, I was thinking I would just add all the herbs and spices to this mixture. But the more I thought about it, that didn't seem like a great idea, since as I mentioned, we're not actually going to eat the plaster. And I was afraid a lot of that flavor would get trapped in the crust and basically wasted. And I was thinking with this method, this plaster coating would harden as it baked and trap all that goodness against the meat. But anyway, once I had that covered, I went ahead and spread some of the excess into the bottom of my roasting pan, which probably didn't really do much, but at the time felt like something I should do. And then I went ahead and placed my pork on top. And then I made sure I reapplied some to any of those spots that got rubbed off during the transfer. And then once I was sure it was covered, I spooned even more over the top. And then once I had that pork as plastered as I was, I proceeded to place it into the center of a 325-degree oven for about 3.5 hours, or until it looked like the Elephant Man. So that just might be the strangest thing I've ever pulled out of my oven. I mean, just absolutely horrifying. Although the other side did look relatively normal, and kinda sorta like plastered pork, and that surface had become quite dry and hard. Check it out. Oh yeah, fork don't lie. Although maybe sometimes it should. And if you weren't going to cut this up and make tacos later, you could just crack this crust off at the table and go ahead and slice up and serve what would hopefully be a very flavorful roast pork. But anyway, that wasn't my plan. So I let this cool down for about an hour, at which point it became uncrackable. Okay, because it absorbed a lot of moisture, it became sort of leathery. So basically I just had to slice in and peel it off. And at this point I was really looking forward to tasting a piece, to see how it came out. In fact, I was so anxious and in a hurry, I was not really paying attention, and I sliced right into that shoulder blade, which will explain that beautiful piece of cartilage you see. But you know what? I got over my fear of eating around cartilage a long time ago. So I tucked in anyway. And that really was some fabulous meat. Okay, like all salt dough crusts, I was hoping this would trap in a lot of moisture and flavor, and I think that's exactly what happened. And no, in case you're wondering, it was not too salty. It was absolutely perfect. And then, because I wanted to cube this up for the tacos, I decided to break it up into as large a chunks as I could. Although, fair warning, around the shoulder blade, there are going to be little pockets of meat that are just going to be small because they're small. And if you're going to have a few more samples, that's the spot you want to get them from. But anyway, I went ahead and broke that apart, mostly leaving it in nice big chunks, so that once this is chilled, they're easy to cube up. All right, if you want shredded pork tacos, go ahead, but I wanted cubes this time. And once I had all that meat on the plate, I noticed some very delicious looking brown goo in the bottom of the pan that I figured I should spoon and spread over, since technically those are accumulated juices, which of course we never throw away. And you can definitely use this right away if you want. But it was getting dark, so I decided to wrap it up with some of those bigger plaster pieces placed over the top. And then I popped that in the fridge and went to bed dreaming of the tacos I would be enjoying the next day. And then at some point before we actually build our tacos, we're going to want to put together this very special salsa, which will include some Honeycrisp apple that we've cut into a nice small dice. And then to that we will add some finely diced white onion, as well as some seeded diced jalapeno. I also tossed in some freshly chopped cilantro, as well as a nice big pinch of salt, plus the juice of one lime that, as you can see, I freshly squeezed by hand. And then I finished up with a little pinch of cayenne, just to stay in shape. And that's it. We'll take a spoon and give that a mix. And of course, give it a taste and adjust if need be. And that really was so delicious, it could have been a video all by itself. But it's not. It's going to go on some pork tacos. So I grabbed a chunk of what was now very cold pork, and I sliced that up and then cut it in strips, and then into about 1/2-inch cubes. And like I said, if you wanted to shred this or chop it up even smaller, go ahead. But I was in the mood for cubes, which after cutting I went ahead and browned up in a dry nonstick pan over medium-high heat. And yes, you heard that correctly, a dry pan. Okay, pork shoulder has a fair amount of fat in it, and as that heats up and melts, you'll see this will brown up nicely. Of course, having said that, if you want to fry this up in a whole bunch of fat, sort of carnita style, especially if it's the reserve fat you save from the pan, that would also be perfectly fine and absolutely incredible. But as I said earlier, I was kind of going for a little bit of a change of pace from my usual carnitas method. But either way is fantastic, so you decide. I mean, you are, after all, the Joseph Merrick of how to prepare it. And once I had that nicely browned, I went ahead and transferred that onto a homemade flour tortilla, which was actually half white, half wheat flour. And after piling on a very generous amount, I went ahead and spooned over that absolutely incredible apple jalapeno salsa. And that, my friends, was one of the best pork tacos I've had in a very, very long time. Okay, even though it looked absolutely bizarre, that plastered pork method really did produce a tender, juicy, flavorful meat. And we could have seasoned that with anything, and these tacos would be amazing. But because this meat is subtly scented with rosemary and black pepper, it works incredibly well with this sweet and slightly spicy jalapeno apple salsa. So I really did enjoy every bite of this. And how much different would these tacos have been if we had just roasted the pork using a traditional method? I don't know. Okay, those questions are really hard to answer. Although it has been my experience that meats roasted in a salt crust or a salt dough usually do come out fairly succulent. Plus, if you did use a traditional method for the pork, there is no way it's going to come out of the oven looking like the Elephant Man. Which is why, especially if you make the salsa also, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.